At first glance, the meeting of Tiana Williams and Edward Langford seemed almost like the beginning of a contemporary fairy tale. Edward, a white man from a line of respected entrepreneurs, carried the effortless confidence of someone born into privilege, a world of private schools, prestigious internships, and quiet certainty. Tiana, by contrast, was a black woman raised by a single father, a widowed engineer in a working-class neighborhood. Her upbringing was modest, but her father had instilled in her independence, the power of education, and quiet pride in her roots. They met in the university library during their final year. Both were focused on their thesis research, but it was Tiana's thoughtful question about sustainable business practices that first drew Edward's attention. Unlike most around him, Tiana challenged his assumptions openly and with wit. Their first conversation, full of debate and mutual curiosity, lasted hours, spilling from economics to art, aspirations, and lived experience. Despite their differences, something genuine sparked between them. Tiana was struck by Edward's willingness to listen and reflect, while Edward found himself drawn to Tiana's intelligence and ambition, a refreshing honesty that set her apart from the carefully groomed socialites he'd grown up with. Over time, their friendship deepened into love. Yet from the beginning, both sensed the unease lurking underneath the excitement of their new relationship. For Tiana, every interaction with Edward's world was a reminder of the class and race barriers she'd always navigated. At dinners in upscale restaurants, she was the only black woman for many tables around, aware of subtle glances from staff and guests. When she visited the Langford family estate for the first time, the marble floors and gilt-framed portraits made her uneasy. It wasn't just the wealth, it was the invisible, unspoken code. The way Edward's family and their friends measured worth not by honesty or kindness, but by pedigree and social standing. Edward noticed the difference but had trouble understanding its full weight. To him, love was enough, and intentions mattered more than circumstances. He tried to reassure Tiana, but sometimes stumbled, not realizing that for her, every misunderstanding or stray remark could carry the burden of 1,000 similar moments. When Edward proposed, it was private and sincere, a walk in the park, laughter in the rain, a ring presented with hopeful trembling. Tiana said yes, her heart full of hope and worry. She wondered how both families would respond, but chose to believe love would conquer fear. The news of the engagement rippled through their social circles. Tiana's father smiled quietly, proud but cautious, warning her only to remain true to herself. Edward's family, however, was less reserved, especially his mother, Veronica. Over a formal dinner, she greeted Tiana with practiced politeness, studying her with eyes that calculated every detail, her accent, her dress, the story of her parents. In private, Veronica's words were colder. She stressed the importance of preserving family assets and protecting Edward's future. It was clear she saw Tiana as an outsider, someone whose motives needed questioning, whose presence threatened a carefully guarded world. Although no blatant slur was spoken, Tiana heard the warning in every phrase. She was not one of them and never would be. For Edward, the realization came slowly. He wanted to defend Tiana, but years of deference to his mother's judgment made him hesitate. He asked Tiana to be patient, to see the best in his family. Tiana, proud and loving, agreed, but inside she readied herself for what was coming. This engagement would be more than a celebration of love. It would be a test of dignity and identity. As plans for the wedding began, Tiana found herself facing questions and sideways glances from every direction. Friends wondered if she could fit in. Some acquaintances at Edward's country club whispered about appearances and changing family dynamics. Even the wedding planners seemed to sidestep her wishes, deferring to Veronica at every chance. Still, Tiana held her head high. She focused on her work, her father's support, and the foundation of truth she and Edward had built. But deep down she knew their union would require more than vows and rings. To survive in Edward's world, she would need resilience, patience, and an unwavering belief that she was enough, exactly as she was. The lines had been drawn even before the first invitation was printed, and while Tiana and Edward's love gave them courage, it was clear that this was not a union of equals in the eyes of all. The unequal union, born of hope but shadowed by prejudice and pride, was just beginning to test its strength. The afternoon sun slipped lazily through the tall windows of the Langford estate, gilding the intricate woodwork and shimmering off glass. Everything about the house spoke of old money and tradition. The ancestral portraits, the silent staff, the faint aroma of polished furniture. Yet beneath this surface calm, tension simmered. A tension Tiana felt acutely as she was ushered into a private sitting room, well away from the laughter and clatter of bustling wedding preparations. Veronica Langford greeted her with a practiced smile, coolly graceful in her immaculate suit. There was a faint click as Veronica placed a slim, leather-bound folder between them on the low table. Her words, formal and almost gentle, belied the steel in her gaze. "Before plans go further," Veronica began, "there are certain family concerns we must address." Tiana's pulse quickened. She half expected this moment, but hope had lingered, a hope that intent and devotion would override suspicion and guarding of privilege. Veronica gestured toward the folder. Tiana opened it with measured hands, eyes flickering quickly over the document inside. Lines of tightly written legal prose stared back at her. A prenuptial agreement sharp between the lines. The terms were clear and severe. If she married Edward, Tiana would renounce any claim to the Langford estate, family trust, or income, no matter how long the marriage lasted or what sacrifices she made for the family. In the event of divorce, she would receive only minimal support, which could be revoked altogether at the discretion of the Langfords. Should Tiana's conduct be considered damaging to the family's reputation, criteria left intentionally vague. The document did not strike Tiana as protection, but rather as a warning, a drawn line declaring who belonged and who did not. She understood without a word that in Veronica's eyes, she was a risk, black from a modest background, carrying with her the threat of newness, difference, the unknown. Veronica's voice settled in the silence. "I want you to know these conditions are not personal, Tiana. They're standard for our family, for our class. I'm sure you understand our need to protect what generations have built." Her tone was soft, even apologetic, but it was a softness that pressed, not comforted. Tiana's dignity, cultivated through years of overcoming slights and quiet prejudice, anchored her in that moment. She knew the script, the careful legalese, the assurance that this is for everyone's good. Still, the sting was real. Signing the agreement would mean setting aside any legal acknowledgement that she and Edward were equals, at least in the eyes of his family. She imagined her father's calm, patient face, pictured him telling her that self-worth was crafted from within, never bestowed by others. Tiana resolved then and there not to betray herself by pleading or arguing. Instead, she would sign the document, not as a gesture of surrender, but as an act of autonomy. Veronica's world thrived on control, but Tiana would not let it rob her of her own sense of power. With steady hands, Tiana picked up the pen, pausing for a breath just long enough to ensure her voice would be steady. She signed the agreement, her signature flowing across the page, every letter an unspoken declaration of her value, regardless of what anyone at that table believed. Veronica watched, inscrutable, as the agreement was folded away and replaced by quiet, forced pleasantries. The silence that followed was heavy with things not said. For a moment, Tiana allowed herself to feel the hurt. The bitter taste of a door closed in her face, just as she'd hoped to walk through it, arm in arm with the man she loved. But she also felt something else. Resolve. Love, she reminded herself, was not a transaction, and integrity could not be purchased or denied with legal paper. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Tiana knew she would face them not as a supplicant, but as a woman who stood her ground, dignified, resilient, and fully herself. As she left the sitting room, head held high, Tiana understood that her marriage to Edward would never be shielded from the scrutiny and silent judgments of his world. But perhaps, she thought, that world was about to learn something new, about her and about what true worth meant. The days after signing the prenuptial agreement weighed heavily on Tiana. Despite her resolve to face the challenges with dignity, the sharp undertone of Veronica's mistrust followed her everywhere, echoing in every corridor of the Langford estate and in the way staff would avert their eyes in silent sympathy. Yet Tiana held within her a source of strength that none of the Langfords suspected, a strength born not only from her character, but also from the man who had shaped her into who she was. Robert Williams, Tiana's father, was a man of immense substance but little show. To neighbors and colleagues, he was the reserved mechanical engineer, always dressed modestly, never boasting, content with the life he had quietly built. To Tiana, Robert was much more, her guide, her confidant, and the foundation upon which her resilience and self-respect rested. Even in the face of adversity, when life closed doors, when the world questioned her belonging, Robert taught Tiana to move forward with quiet pride and unshakable self-worth. Unknown to the Langford family, and even to Tiana herself in full measure, Robert had been far more than a diligent employee. Over decades, he had invested his earnings with remarkable acumen, often through anonymous partnerships and trusted advisors, building a portfolio that grew quietly in the background of their modest life. The world saw a humble man, but behind the scenes Robert had amassed a fortune surpassing $1 billion through a blend of early technology investments, real estate holdings, and patient stewardship. Robert's philosophy was never to allow money, or the lack thereof, define his daughter's worth. He raised Tiana to value hard work, intellect, and community. On weekends, rather than teaching her to spend lavishly, he guided her to help at local shelters, read voraciously, and discuss ideas that reached beyond their apartment's worn walls. He taught her that legacy was measured in lives touched, and strength of character, not in displays of wealth. Robert's health had always seemed steady, making his sudden passing all the more devastating. In the stillness of mourning, Tiana clung to her father's lessons, hoping that wise choices and dignity were enough to sustain her as the world and her new family scrutinized her every move. The day of the will reading arrived quietly with gray skies above and tension within. The Langford family gathered, Veronica with pursed lips, Edward with a supportive hand resting lightly on Tiana's arm, and a few close advisors present for legal formality. As the attorney began detailing Robert's estate, the room shifted from polite disinterest to utter silence. Names of offshores, shares in blue-chip firms, and trusts that spanned the globe rolled delicately off the lawyer's tongue. With every line, it became clear Tiana was not simply the daughter of an earnest worker, but the heir to a powerful, unseen empire of wealth and resource. Veronica's composure faltered, her practiced mask slipping as the realization dawned. The prenuptial agreement, so meticulously crafted to insulate the Langford fortune, became a mere relic, powerless to diminish the new truth. Suddenly, the dynamics between the two families shifted. The position of supplicant into which Tiana had been pressed now vanished, replaced by a silent authority she wore with natural grace. For Tiana, the inheritance was bittersweet. She mourned the man who built it, realizing how carefully he'd protected both his wealth and his daughter from the trappings of privilege. There was no sense of triumph over the Langfords, only quiet satisfaction that her father's lessons of humility and restraint now held even greater meaning. Edward's view of his wife shifted too, deepening into admiration. No longer simply standing up for her against his family's biases, Edward now saw Tiana as a full equal, her own person, worthy not only in heart but in legacy. The Langford home's legacy of power and tradition, once thought unassailable, now met its match in Tiana's understated strength. In the days that followed, Tiana felt the subtle shift in how she was addressed. In letters and at dinners, her voice carried new weight, and even Veronica seemed to stumble over words when speaking to her. Yet Tiana carried herself as she always had, with calm, with kindness, and with a vow to use her new resources to inspire change. She resolved that her father's quiet empire would never become a tool for revenge or vanity. Instead, she would honor his legacy by uplifting others who faced prejudice and exclusion, launching educational funds and quietly sponsoring mentorship programs for youth from backgrounds like her own. For Tiana, wealth was only meaningful when used to break down barriers, not reinforce them. Each night, as she reflected on the path behind and the one ahead, Tiana whispered a simple promise to her father's memory that she would remain guided by principle, compassion, and an unwavering sense of self. She understood now, as perhaps even the Langfords did, that true value belonged to those who built, forgave, and inspired, no matter which side of the estate gates they called home. The reading of Robert Williams's will sent invisible shockwaves through the Langford estate. In the days that followed, every interaction between Tiana and her husband's family seemed to occur in a charged atmosphere, where words were measured and silences spoke volumes. Veronica, once composed and unassailable, now found herself unmoored. No amount of polite conversation or well-rehearsed etiquette could hide the unease that had settled over her like a heavy velvet curtain. Veronica watched Tiana with a new wariness. The woman she had viewed as a threat to the family's status had, in a blink, become someone whose fortune eclipsed their own. For the first time, Veronica hesitated before issuing an opinion, suddenly conscious of Tiana's voice in every decision about the wedding, philanthropy, and family traditions. The staff, who had always followed Veronica's lead, now hovered politely around Tiana as well, uncertain which woman commanded the true center of power. Social invitations, too, began to shift. Where once Tiana's presence had been met with forced smiles at country club brunches, now she noticed genuine curiosity, even overtures from women who previously ignored her. Tiana, dignified but perceptive, saw this for what it was: the world's reflexive pivot toward money, a new equation where her worth to the social order had, overnight, increased beyond calculation. But she remained unchanged. Tiana met every social friendship with the same measured warmth she always showed, withholding quick trust, offering gentle but clear reminders of her values and boundaries. Her refusal to flaunt her inheritance quietly exposed those whose respect was founded solely on her new wealth, not her character. Meanwhile, she continued to focus on the legacy her father intended, using her resources to empower and support others, never seeking applause for her acts. Edward was changed as well. Seeing the pained disbelief in his mother's face and the guarded admiration from his peers, he realized fully what Tiana had endured and what she had chosen not to reveal or leverage when she could have. More than ever, he stood by her side, less apologetic to his family, more protective and admiring than before. But this newfound strength also deepened the tension between Edward and Veronica, whose whispers about family standing and lost traditions grew sharper in private conversation. The dinner table became a quiet battlefield. Veronica, her pride wounded, would now catch herself before making dismissive comments about Tiana's background. She sometimes looked as though she wished to apologize, but the words died in her throat, pride and confusion warring within her. Tiana, for her part, refused to become either vindictive or submissive. She answered questions calmly, asserted herself when necessary, and let uncomfortable pauses linger if the conversation strayed into old patterns of exclusion. Subtle alliances began to form within the extended family. A few cousins, inspired by Tiana's understated generosity and inclusive spirit, actively sought her counsel and friendship. Others avoided her, clinging to the old social order that no longer held sway. Crucially, Tiana did not use her fortune to settle scores. At charity events and family gatherings, she insisted on mutual respect, and over time, those around her saw that her strength was in her character, not the size of her inheritance. Slowly, Veronica, too, was forced to acknowledge what she saw in Tiana: resilience, grace, and a quality that could never be measured in financial statements. Yet beneath the calm, currents of resentment still flowed. There were moments when Tiana caught the flash of bitterness in Veronica's eyes, a fleeting defensiveness as if guarding against defeat. For Veronica, the shock of seeing her power, usurped not by scandal but by the quiet revelation of worth, remained a wound not easily healed. As summer turned to autumn and the wedding approached, the air in the Langford estate grew less tense but more honest. Tiana's unwavering dignity set a new tone for the family, one no longer built on exclusion and hierarchy, but on the slow, sometimes difficult path toward mutual understanding. The stage was set for the final reconciliation, or perhaps for one last test of what it truly meant to leave the past behind and build something new together. The wedding day arrived wrapped in a crisp autumn air, shafts of sunlight illuminating the grand halls and manicured gardens of the Langford estate. Everything was meticulously arranged. Rare flowers bordered the aisle, string quartets played softly in the distance, and the subtle murmur of guests, half in admiration, half in speculation, rose and fell like a tide. Tiana moved with poised grace among them, her simple yet refined gown a silent statement of her refusal to be absorbed by ostentation. Edward stood beside her, aware that each vow spoken was also a quiet defiance of the traditions and prejudices that lingered in their family's shadows. While the ceremony sparkled with outward celebration, the invisible lines of class and race that had threatened to sabotage their union still wove through the crowd. Certain relatives smiled with genuine warmth, but others glanced over raised glasses with cool calculation, accepting the marriage only so far as it didn't disrupt their entrenched sense of order. Tiana noticed, catalogued in silence, but allowed neither approval nor skepticism to touch the calm resolve with which she met each gaze. Exchanging vows, Tiana found solace not just in Edward's words, but in her own. She pledged loyalty and love, but also a promise to remain true to the legacy of strength and dignity her father had instilled. Edward, too, used this moment to proclaim his determination to shed inherited fears and look toward a more courageous, inclusive future. The applause that followed was civil and measured, masking the tangled emotions running through both families. The reception was a carefully orchestrated fusion. Edward's family traditions wove together with Tiana's subtle influences, from the menu to the music. Tiana's short speech captured the heart of the occasion, reminding everyone present that love's power lies in its refusal to be caged by custom or suspicion. Without naming names or battles won, her words gently cast light on the hard path still being forged, and the work yet to be done to create a family that honored every story at the table. In the weeks after the ceremony, daily life settled into new routines. Tiana wasted no time using her inheritance to fund scholarships for underprivileged students and launch mentorship programs in the city's most neglected neighborhoods, quietly fulfilling her father's vision of legacy, not as possession, but as possibility for others. Edward, increasingly aware of his own family's blind spots, became an active partner, attending board meetings, connecting wealthy contacts with Tiana's causes, and standing with her whenever subtle resistance or veiled sniping reared up. Veronica's demeanor shifted in complex ways. The icy certainty of her earlier days was replaced by a brittle civility. Calls sometimes went unanswered, invitations were occasionally lost, and her opinion in family matters, once delivered with unquestioned finality, now arrived tempered, hesitant. But Tiana maintained her dignity, meeting every slight with grace, refusing to let bitterness settle in her spirit. During these first months, an unexpected friendship blossomed. Edward's younger cousin, Eva, began to seek Tiana's company, first out of curiosity and later from genuine admiration. Eva's transformation, from a bystander at family dinners to a confidant, inspired by Tiana's resilience, offered the Langfords a glimpse of what was possible when old divisions were questioned, not just endured. Edward, too, was evolving. The rigid worldview shaped by his upbringing gave way to open conversations about race, belonging, and tradition. He learned to listen rather than fix, and to stand up for Tiana more assertively. Their marriage became a partnership not only in emotion, but in the shared work of challenging assumptions and building new family norms. Family gatherings shifted. Once battlegrounds, they became uneasy but more honest spaces. Aunts and uncles quietly asked Tiana for advice on educational charities. A few even apologized for old slights. Veronica watched from a cautious distance, her own heart at war between pride and the possibility of change. Winter melted to a budding spring, and Tiana found new clarity in reflection. Every struggle, the raw wound of the prenup, the painful knowledge of being treated as lesser, the weight and surprise of her father's secret legacy, now seemed less a chain and more a foundation. She understood. Acceptance and equality were not destinations, but ongoing work, acts of courage renewed with each interaction, each act of kindness or self-assertion. The love between her and Edward had survived fire and frost, and the world they were forging together was, at last, something larger than old prejudices. With every step forward, Tiana honored the dreams her father planted and proved daily that real power lies not in wealth or lineage, but in living unbowed and lifting others as you climb. The story that began as an unequal union was now the first notes of a legacy truly her own. Just as the Langfords settled into their revised family dynamics, a letter arrived for Tiana, sealed in the familiar, meticulous handwriting of her father's longtime attorney. It was an invitation to finalize the last details of Robert Williams's estate, a formality Tiana assumed, but one she approached with her ever-present sense of responsibility. What transpired in the attorney's oak-paneled office would permanently alter not only her life, but the course of the entire extended Langford family. Along with Edward, Tiana entered the room, her mood tinged with bittersweetness. The loss of her father still ached, but she was determined to honor his legacy with clear-headed stewardship. Veronica appeared too, at first by family obligation, but her curiosity about the size and details of the inheritance was thinly veiled. The attorney began with standard formalities, but soon shifted to the matter of Robert's holdings. What started as a list of modest assets, a well-kept house, a car, several mementos, quickly expanded into staggering territory. Robert, always humble and prudent, had quietly accumulated a diversified empire of investments, trusts, intellectual property rights, and charitable foundation endowments. The final sum totaled in excess of $1 billion. Tiana listened in astonishment as accounts, deeds, and portfolios were listed in calm legal cadence. After detailing the specifics, the attorney turned to Tiana. With professionalism and warmth, he explained that not only was she the sole beneficiary, but she would also chair the trust and charitable foundation. Everything her father had built, he explained, was meant to give Tiana choices her ancestors had only dreamed of, to lead, to impact, and above all, to be free from the chains of others' expectations. The silence in the room was palpable. For a moment, even Edward was unable to speak. Veronica's rigid composure evaporated. The woman who had once viewed Tiana with suspicion and condescension now stared at her daughter-in-law with a mix of awe, envy, and something approaching fear. The reality of Robert's secret wealth and Tiana's complete control over it shifted the familial power dynamics once more, erasing any pretense that the Langford's status was untouchable or that Tiana would ever be beholden to them. But Tiana bore this revelation with the same grace that had guided her through every previous storm. She made no mention of old wounds or past humiliations. Instead, she thanked the attorney, composed herself, and quietly promised to honor her father's vision, one rooted in generosity, respect, and the belief that dignity can never be measured by social standing or financial fortune. In the weeks that followed, Tiana's new reality became public knowledge in elite circles. Invitations flooded in now, not out of curiosity or polite obligation, but out of genuine interest in her perspective, influence, and resources. Even the most intransigent relatives found reason to soften their tones. Country club chairs and philanthropic boards vied for her attention. Socialites whispered her name at every function. Yet, Tiana never allowed this newfound attention to change the core of her character. She insisted that any charitable commitments engage directly with communities in need. She challenged organizations to do more than offer diversity grants, to open leadership roles, create mentorships, and break barriers for those overlooked, as she once had been. Edward, too, found renewed respect for his wife, recognizing that her vision extended far beyond any boardroom or estate. Family life, while still marked by lingering class and cultural divides, slowly grew more authentic. Veronica, stung but also softened by circumstance, began attending family gatherings less out of command than out of curiosity and eventually warmth. She watched Tiana manage her fortune and new responsibilities with humility and purpose, a living lesson that character, not lineage, sets the true arc of destiny. For Tiana, this chapter was more than a personal victory. It was a testament to resilience and an answer to all who had doubted her. The billion-dollar secret wasn't just an inheritance. It was a quiet, powerful justice, affirming that worth and potential are never defined by the prejudices or protections of others. As spring eased into summer, Tiana found a calm she hadn't felt since childhood. She honored her father's lessons not by wielding power, but by sharing it, transforming every closed door into a new threshold for herself and for others who would follow. And in this, she finally transformed the unequal union into a partnership and a legacy worthy of its challenges and triumphs. The seasons changed once more, carrying with them a renewed sense of possibility and hope for Tiana Williams and Edward Langford. The journey that began with an uneven union shaped by suspicion, prejudice, and unspoken barriers came full circle as a testament to resilience, respect, and genuine growth. Tiana had endured the cold realities of exclusion and underestimation with unwavering grace. Each challenge, Veronica's pointed objections, the humiliating prenuptial agreement, the silent judgments in every gilded room, had carved deeper resolve and clarity into her spirit. The revelation of her father's quiet fortune, however, became more than just poetic justice. It proved that worth and dignity are never dictated by birthright or old society's gaze. In the months after her inheritance became known, Tiana approached her new position not as a conquest, but as an opportunity for transformation. She refused to wield her fortune as a weapon or a shield, choosing instead to invest in initiatives for education and youth mentorship, breaking down the same walls of opportunity she had once faced. With Edward's partnership and the steady growth of supportive allies, her vision extended across communities, making lasting impact where it was needed most. Edward, having witnessed every subtle and overt resistance Tiana weathered, now stood fully at her side. His journey from quiet complicity toward active allyship mirrored the subtle awakening within his own family. Veronica, whose pride had once been a fortress, saw the futility in old prejudices. She was forced to confront her own fears and ignorance, and in Tiana's presence began to recognize substance and grace far beyond the superficial boundaries that had once defined her world. Their wedding day, once overshadowed by unease and quiet power struggles, blossomed into a celebration not only of love, but of hope and progress. The room was filled with a blend of backgrounds, relatives who had learned, some transformed, others simply respectful. Tiana and Edward's vows carried a deeper weight, promising not only partnership but also courage, to confront their own failings and work together for a fairer, kinder future. The story of Tiana's journey through the world of old money, through the grinding pressures of class and race, through the quiet humility of her father's lessons, spread further than she had imagined. She became a quiet beacon for others facing the same burdens, reminding them that real change begins with self-worth and the patient, persistent work of dismantling barriers. As years passed, the legacy of both families transformed. For the Langfords, it was a humbling passage from inherited privilege to conscious inclusion. For Tiana, the inheritance of her father's empire became not a badge of superiority, but a wellspring for justice, generosity, and humility. In the quietness after storm and spotlight, Tiana and Edward finally found peace, not as winners in a contest of pride, but as equals who had earned each other's respect and the freedom to love without apology or shame. Their home, once guarded by the invisible walls of doubt, became a space of laughter, compassion, and shared dreams, a legacy for their children and for all who would come after. The story that began with separation, fear, and conditions ended with dignity reclaimed, power shared, and the hope of a world where character, not class or color, is the foundation for true equality. As dusk fell over the Langford estate and the city beyond, Tiana whispered a quiet thanks to her father's memory and to every hardship she had overcome. In choosing courage over bitterness, she had turned an old world upside down, not for revenge, but to build something new and just, proving once and for all that love, dignity, and hope belong to those who dare to claim them.